Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name's Ron Boggs, and I live on a farm outside of New Bloomsburg, Pennsylvania, about 30 miles northwest of Harrisburg, where I grew up. I had some pictures. Have some pictures. They're in the chapter building at the back. Some of you seen. I brought them along so you can see them with the captions. There's some of the pictures you're going to see up here on the screen. But these have the captions on them, so for later, so afterwards you can come and look at them. Also, I need to tell you that age has caused me to lose my short-term memory and my word retrieval. So I'm going to have to read this to you so I don't miss anything. And I'm sorry I have to read something and not speak like the last speaker did, but I just can't do that anymore. I used to be a school teacher and it just doesn't come on anymore. So I'll read it to you and that way it'll get done through pretty quick. I began working for International Harvester around 1961 as a teenager. I, on occasion, swept the showroom floor at the Carlisle International Harvester Company store, where Dad was the store manager. When the Cub Cadet tractors started being produced, I would sweep and also set up cadets. This meant cutting off the box, jacking up the cadet, and putting on the wheels, the steering wheel, the seat, then fastening the tie rods. I did a lot of them, all for free. During the summer of 1964, after I had just graduated from high school, Dad got me a summer job working for International Harvester at the Harrisburg District Warehouse on McClay Street in Harrisburg. I worked with Ken Baer, the warehouse supervisor, Lyman Angle, and Tony Andolina. My immediate job was to work with Angle taking the railroad boxcar loads of equipment and palletizing everything. So when someone from a dealership came in to pick up a piece of equipment, all the different loose parts would be on one pallet ready to load. All the pieces had to be arranged on a pallet just so other similar pallets of equipment could be stacked on top to save room in the warehouse. The equipment parts were heavy and work could be dangerous if it was not done just right. Late one Friday, a dealer came in to pick up a number 1 4-H wagon. Angle and I were bringing all the pieces out and helping to load them on the truck. The 4-H wagon beaters were all stacked on one pallet together, so we had to get them off the stack. The stack was about 6 foot high. Angle was on one side of the stack and I was about in the middle of the beater lifting it off the others on the stack. It was tight. I pulled hard. Suddenly it left loose. Angle lost his hold, and the beater rolled over and over down my outstretched arms. The beaters were very sharp on the ends, and the beater stopped rolling when it hit and tore into my upper left arm and put a small hole in my chest, and between two of my ribs. The chest wound didn't bleed much, but the laceration on my arm did. I was walked upstairs where a couple of the district office secretaries cleaned the wound and put a large bandage on it. I was okay until they cleaned it off and I saw the purple muscle fiber showing between the torn skin. I felt queasy and they said I turned awful pale. I stayed there until quitting time, went home with my brother who was working in the warehouse office. Today I would have been rushed to the hospital in an ambulance and would have gotten stitches. Not so back then. It healed on its own and I still have the scar. I went back to work the following Monday. Life was very different back then. Right there. Still there. Towards the end of the summer, I was driving a forklift and stacking pallets, and also going back and bringing equipment orders out to the dock for dealers. One day I had brought a truckload of equipment out for a truck that came in from a dealership somewhere in Maryland, and I think it was possibly Bel Air, Maryland. As the driver finished tightening the load binders, he turned to me and in his very southern accent asked if I had any war. I had no clue what that was. To my knowledge, IH didn't make war. After a minute, he finally said, "You know, war, to wire down my chain binders." I said, "Oh, you mean wire?" And I went and got him some. Toward the end of the summer, I had gotten pretty darn good on operating that forklift. Near the end of one day, we were told that we had to unload a whole boxcar load of baler twine because the boxcar was scheduled to be picked up that night. Luckily, it was on pallets in the car, but there was a lot of it. Tony used the larger forklift and I used a smaller one that I usually drove. As we got toward quitting time, we were getting near the end of the load. We were driving pretty fast down the aisles of the warehouse. As I approached the boxcar, I realized I was going a little too fast. I hit the brake a little too hard and the front wheels locked up, and I came to a sliding stop. Unfortunately, the front wheels had started to cross the steel plate between the dock and the boxcar. There I was, back wheels on the dock, front wheels in the boxcar, and no steel plate between the car and the dock. I had skidded the plate right into the boxcar. I was worried what to do. Soon Tony came along. He laughed and picked up my back end and pushed me into the boxcar. Crisis averted. And I slowed down a little after that. It was a long, hot summer, but I learned a lot about the warehouse end of the business. This was the same job my dad had had when he first started to work with International Harvester in 1943. At the end of 1964, I again worked for International Harvester between Christmas and New Year's Day. This time I was employed as a cleaner and polisher of equipment that was going to be displayed in the Pennsylvania State Farm Show in January. The Farm Show building was located directly across the street from the warehouse. I, however, worked way in the back of the cold warehouse. It was a cold, dirty job, and I was glad when that week ended. My older brother Wayne, as I stated before, also worked summers at the Harrisburg District Office and warehouse, starting in 1960. The first year he, like me, had worked out in the warehouse. The other 4 summers he worked in the warehouse office. During his first summer in the warehouse, he was asked by an IH employee, who I won't name, to take a combine from Harrisburg to Hershey. He was to take it by truck. He was 18 years old and never even had driven a pickup truck, let alone a big truck with a huge load on it. As he drove down old Route 22, he drove very slowly. This was because, try as he might, he could not shift gears using the high-low split shift button. He thinks he used the high reins the whole way and probably never got out of 4th gear. Needless to say, he was very late getting to Hershey. Not knowing exactly how to get to Hershey didn't help either. That night, Dad was furious when he found out what Wayne had been given to do that day. I can tell you for certain that employee never allowed another 18-year-old to deliver equipment. Anybody in here know my dad, Lee Boggs? He worked in Harrisburg, and then he ran the Carlisle, Pennsylvania store. This is the jobs he had while he was working with the company for 33 years. He started work on July 7th, 1943 at the Harrisburg warehouse as a warehouse parts helper. Instead of farm equipment, he was involved with IH-made military equipment like tank treads and tracks and other military equipment. By 46, he was working in the parts department at the IHC and McCormick store in Harrisburg. 50 to 53, so he was his own manager for the Center County State College, Williamsport, Montour, and Dewshore area, which is kind of up in this area. In 53 to 59, he was a district service manager in the Harrisburg district office, and for 59 to 60, he became the service supervisor at Harrisburg. 1960 to 76, he became the manager of the Carlisle and the Shippensburg store, but Shippensburg was sold out to a private company somewhere before he retired in 76, because in 76 he did retire. Dad died December 1st, 1997. While Dad was district service manager at Harrisburg, he was in charge of setting up the IH display during the National Ploughing Contest held at Hershey Estates back in August of 1958. They had all sorts of new equipment on display. A humongous big tent was also set up. Inside that tent, they had equipment shows and information kiosks. For the shows, the people sat on bleachers. The best show was the tractor square dance. They used narrow front Super C's 200s or 230s. I don't remember which one. Each tractor used a piece of a 2-point equipment as a partner. One was a disc, another was a carrier, another was a corn planter, and I can't remember what the 4th one was. They all used pieces of equipment that were very stable when they were set down. The latch pins were removed on the extremely greased 2-point hitch so that the equipment was easily unhooked. They traded equipment just like square dancers today trade partners during a dance. It was impressive. You can't do that today with 3-point hitch, that's for sure. Under the tent, they also handed out a lot of Hershey candy. They gave out candy in what looked like a IH cardboard covered box. Inside the cardboard was a small Hershey bar, a Summit Sweet bar, a Crunch Crackle bar, and a Mr. Good bar from Hershey. Every day they had children's IH pedal tractor races on a specially made show, or specially made for the show, concrete pad. My brother Don back there was only 6 years old. After much practice with me at home with his Farmall M pedal tractor, he won one of the races. The prize was a 1/16 scale Farmall 460. He wound up competing against 4 girls and didn't have a 12-year-old brother to train them. When that starter yelled go, he was off like a streak. They were weaving back and forth. My picture shows him over here winning the race, also with him and his prize. 1958 was when the 240, 340, 460, 560, and 660 were introduced to the public, and there were a lot of them there. Also in the daily equipment grades was, I believe, the new 101 self-propelled combine. One day, Dad arranged for Mom and I and a couple others to take a ride in the twin-engine IH company plane. We took off at the old Hershey Airport and circled Hershey a couple times and then landed. I was ecstatic. I loved airplanes, and this was my first ride in one. I brought pictures of it back here too, and if you look real close, you can see the IH on its tail. During that week, they played this song over and over again from inside the tent. This is how I remember it. Step into a new world of power. IH marches on, the great new Farmall tractors, international tractors, bigger, better buys. You get more power, IH power, in every power buy, da da da. And that continued over and over again until they finally turned it off, and then maybe 3 or 4 times they ran that through about every half hour. So that's why me, my brother Don back there, and my older brother Wayne know it to this day by heart. Just as a sidelight to the 1958 ploughing contest, a lady by the name of Pauline Blankenship won the 1958 Tennessee Contour Ploughing Championship in July of 1958 and was going to compete in the national event at Hershey in August. I don't know how she did. 3 of my pictures were from the 1958 contest. The ploughing picture that's there, back here, was the one from Hershey. The picture of her and her husband was from the 1957 National Ploughing Contest in Ohio, where she came in 5th. So she was a pretty good plower, but she said that she liked plowing a lot better than doing household chores. Dad was also picked to get brand new equipment that's never been sold and to test it. He took it down to Hershey and he tested it in their fields. And I think he had a combine down there one day, and they wanted him to put it through his paces. So he was out there combining and combining and combining. And the engineer came up to him and said, "Hey, we want you to really put this through its paces. If you can't do that, we'll get somebody that can." Boy, did he rip that thing out through it and ripped it around and really tested it out for him after that. I accompanied Dad in the big stored delivery truck one day to the White Hills State Correctional Institute, or prison, if you prefer, in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. They had bought a new tractor from Dad in his IH company's Carlisle store. After we had unloaded it, we got back into the truck to pick up a Ford tractor that they had traded in. It, however, was inside the prison gates. We drove through the first gate and stopped. I had to get out and wait there because Dad had to go through the next gate into the prison yard to load the tractor. No kids allowed in there. I can still see the key coming down on a rope from the tower guard. Someone unlocking the next gate, and immediately up went the key, and Dad drove through the open gate, which closed immediately behind him. I could see the prison yard from where I was standing. There was a huge pile of limestone rocks, which the inmates were cracking with a sledgehammer. When that pile was made into small pieces, it was loaded and hauled away to be replaced with another pile of rocks. I feel this is what is needed at big prisons today. Maybe they would not wish to ever do something again to make a return to prison. When Dad came out, he drove through the outside gate and we started driving around the outside of the prison. Dad kept asking me if the guard in the tower out my side of the truck had waved yet. I kept saying that he had not. Suddenly, Dad jammed on the brakes and stopped. The guard then waved. Dad told me that if he did not get a clearance wave, they might start shooting. I was glad to get away from there, I'll tell you. I brought a picture of me driving a new Cub Cadet tractor in the Shippensburg Fair parade. Behind me in the cadet trailer was my brother pitching out candy to the kids along the street. Behind us was a brand new IH Scout. I, of course, was wearing my new IH hat. My brother Don and I had a lot of IH hats and jackets to wear while growing up, as you can see in some of the other pictures back here. When I was older, Dad got me a gray IH work hat that I would pin the sides up to make it look like a cowboy hat. In January of 2007, I wrote an article about Dad's life working with the company. I sent it and a copy of all his IH pictures to Darrell Darst. The article and all the pictures appeared in the October 2007 issue of Harvester Highlights magazine. I brought copies of the pictures that were in it along today too. While Dad was the store manager at the Carlisle company store, he related real life stories to us to help us keep safe on our farm. There was the corn picker incident. One day a guy burst in the front door of the store and yelled that his brother was caught in a corn picker. Dad was up and out of his office in a flash. He yelled for his shop foreman, Bill Mitchell. They grabbed some tools and jumped into the shop pickup truck. When they got to the field, there was the farmer, stuck up to his shoulder in the picker rolls. A doctor had been called to amputate the arm right there in the field. Dad got on the tractor, lifted up the two-row picker head, and he and Bill got underneath and loosened the bolts that held the picker rolls in place and freed him. He was rushed to Carlisle Hospital in an ambulance. He lived, but he did lose his arm. Lesson learned, never try to clean out a jammed piece of equipment while it is still running. Never. Another day, one of the customers was using a tractor in high gear to haul corn silage in a big forage wagon from the field to the silo. He hit a bump in the road and a hitch pin jumped out. And because he was going downhill, the wagon caught up to the tractor, and the tractor wheels picked the wagon up and over the seat and crushed the man to death. Lesson? We always used a locking hitch pin on our tractor after that. The most heartrending story he told us about concerned a little farm girl. Apparently, while the farm workers were eating lunch, after a morning of filling the silo with corn, the farmer's little girl went missing. A search of the property found nothing. Finally, one of the men looked into the silo. The tractor and the chopper blower had been left run during lunch. Apparently, the girl had somehow gotten onto the chopper feeder apron and was now in the silo. Dad had tears in his eyes, and it still brings me to tears too, when he told us this story. I never forget that story, and I think about it every year during the silo fielding season. Lesson learned, never ever let equipment run unattended. No exceptions. Around 1961 or 62, after a hard winter, one of Dad's salesmen at the Carlisle store noticed that an old pull-behind disc had sunk 3 feet into the ground in the last row of equipment. It was in a newly formed sinkhole. Dad called the state authorities. After much checking and the disc sinking another 3 feet into the sinkhole, it was decided by the state that the hole needed to be dug down to its bottom After weeks of digging, there was a hole way over 50 feet deep. The state brought in truck after truck after truckload of concrete and dumped it in. After it had hardened, they filled the rest of the hole with dirt. I don't think they ever got the disc out in usable shape, as I recall. Today, that sinkhole is under the southbound on-ramp entrance to Interstate 81 off the York Road, or Route 74, located at the eastern edge of Carlisle. That is why the state people got all excited. Interstate 81 was just being built outside the store at that time, and the sinkhole was right where the on-ramp was to be made. So if you ever go down there and you're going up that ramp, which I've done all the time, think about that, what's down there. Does anyone in here remember Phil Gorman? Okay. He was at the Harrisburg District Office Manager during the late 1950s and early 1960s. Dad received a letter from Phil dated November 30th, 1963, congratulating him for turning a nice profit at the Carlisle store that year, November 30th, 1963. 2 days later, Dad got another letter from the Harrisburg District Office stating that Phil had died at 9 p.m. on November 30th, 1963. That letter that Dad had gotten was probably the last letter Phil ever wrote. I now have that letter at home. A couple of Dad's IH pictures were taken at the Altoona Horseshoe Curve. International Harvester got the Pennsylvania Railroad to stop a train on the curve and took pictures of the international employees standing in front of a trainload of IH balers. Dad titled the picture, October 1st, 1953, first trainload of balers to any district in the USA. Dad and a lot of other Harrisburg office men and others, who I don't recognize, were in the pictures. One of those men in the pictures was Jack Reinhardt. Amazingly, in January of 2017, when my son and his wife moved to Seattle, Washington, they met a man one weekend by the name of Mike Reinhardt. It turns out Mike is Jack's youngest son. At that time, Jack was still alive and still remembered Dad. One of the pictures I brought along is me with my IH pith helmet on and my younger brother Don outside our camp up in our woods. My older brother Wayne and I built it there. As you can see in the picture back here, it was made out of old IH binder canvases that had been discarded by the company. We had built another camp earlier, but it had been destroyed during a windstorm by a huge white pine. Other photos of the IH tractors are tractors and equipment that I own. The IHC tobacco pouch that's pictured there, it looks big, but it was really only about that big. I bought for $5 at a local auction back in 2005. I decided to sell it at the yearly IH auction when it was held down in Frederick, Maryland a couple years ago. The pouch brought $675. And the auctioneer said that the person that bought it was prepared to go as high as $1,200. Oh, I wish somebody else would have kept it. The little tin toy tractor I have pictured, I bought it at an auction 2 weeks before the Maryland auction. It was made by the Marks Toy Company. I paid $17 for it and a box full of other toy cars. It sold at the auction for $60. And it was one of the few things I ever saw that Marks actually put IH and Farmall on. And usually Marks didn't do that specifically. I personally didn't work long for International Harvester, but I sure have a lot of good IH memories. Thank you for listening.